Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, I am seriously so thrilled you're here today because we're crossing a massive threshold. I mean, think about it. Every single theory we've covered together so far in this series has looked deep inside the individual for an explanation of crime. We've talked about free will, we've explored inherited biology, we've analyzed unconscious conflict and personality traits, the whole shebang. But today, we are officially leaving all those individual level theories behind. We're moving into the sociological block of our exploration, and we're kicking it off with a concept that is literally going to fundamentally shift our entire perspective. So I want you to consider this central mystery. What if the neighborhood itself explains crime? None of the earlier theories we studied even thought to ask this. They were entirely focused on the who. But today, we are looking at the where. This is social disorganization theory, and I've got to say, it remains one of the most influential, most widely tested frameworks in all of sociology. Okay, let's dive into this. We're taking our old way of thinking, those individual theories focusing on things like free will, biology, and personality, and contrasting it with our totally new lens, sociological theories that focus purely on the neighborhood environment. If you really want to understand crime through a sociological lens, you kind of have to stop asking what is wrong with the person committing the crime and start asking what is happening in the environment surrounding them. Section 1, the Chicago School and the concentric zone model. To understand where this massive shift in thinking came from, we need to travel back to the early 1900s. Chicago was exploding. I'm talking massive industrialization, waves of immigration, and just unprecedented urban growth. It basically became a live laboratory for sociologists at the University of Chicago. Two of these early Chicago school scholars, Robert Park and Ernest Burgess, mapped the city as a series of rings expanding outward from the central business district. It was called a concentric zone model. But they noticed one ring in particular, which they called the zone in transition. Sitting right there, just outside the business district, this specific area consistently showed the highest rates of poverty, the worst physical deterioration, and massive population turnover. As new immigrant groups arrived in the city, they'd move here temporarily, and as soon as they scraped together some money, they moved further out. Park and Burgess described this pattern of physical and social deterioration, where populations just continually cycled through without staying long enough to build stable institutions, as social disorganization. And that mapping work, it set up an absolutely incredible puzzle. Why did crime and delinquency rates stay consistently high in these exact same geographic zones, generation after generation, even as the specific ethnic and immigrant groups living there kept completely changing? This totally defied common sense at the time. I mean, if crime was all about the traits of a specific group of people, the crime rate should have moved out to the suburbs with that group when they left, right? But it didn't. The crime stayed put. Section 2, Shaw and McKay's core argument. So solving this specific puzzle basically became the life's work of two researchers named Clifford Shaw and Henry McKay. Building directly on that Chicago school foundation, they published a landmark study on juvenile delinquency that provided the blueprint for cracking this mystery. They argued that three structural community characteristics were driving this persistent crime. First, low economic status, which really just means concentrated poverty. Second, ethnic homogeneity, meaning a highly mixed population that doesn't yet have a shared cultural foundation or a common language to build cohesion around. And third, residential instability, meaning high rates of people constantly moving in and moving out. When you combine these three structural factors, you create an environment where long-term relationships and stable community institutions simply cannot take root. Together, those three factors produce what Shaw and McKay formally defined as social disorganization. Basically, this is the inability of a community's social institutions, think families, local schools, religious groups, community centers, to effectively socialize young people toward lawful behavior. It also means they can't informally monitor and control residents' behavior. When the population is always churning and poverty is high, those institutions just stay weak. So, the crucial takeaway here is perfectly captured in this quote. Crime is caused by bad places, not by bad people. It is not that these disorganized neighborhoods are full of inherently bad individuals. No. It's simply that these specific geographic areas lack the stable social structure you need to transmit conventional values and supervise behavior, the way a more settled, cohesive community can. Section 3, Evolving the Theory, Modern Refinements. Now, sociology obviously didn't just stop with Shaw and McKay in the early 20th century. Later criminologists didn't abandon this original framework. They refined it. They made it much more sophisticated. For instance, Robert Bursick and Harold Grasmick developed what's known as systemic control theory. They argued that a community's ability to control crime operates on three escalating levels. Step 1 is the informal, personal relationships between neighbors. This is what Sean McKay originally emphasized. But Bursick and Grasmick added Step 2, the connections between local community groups and institutions. And then, crucially, Step 3, a community's ties to outside resources and political power. Think about a neighborhood's ability to attract municipal funding or secure better policing. This is so vital because it explains why some materially poor neighborhoods still manage to have lower crime rates. They might lack money, sure, but they retain incredibly strong internal ties and external political connections. Another major evolution comes from researcher Robert Sampson, who introduced a concept called collective efficacy. He defined this as the combination of mutual trust among neighbors plus their shared willingness to actually intervene for the common good. It means stepping in when they see a problem rather than just staying silent, closing the blinds, or looking the other way. And guess what? Research actually shows that neighborhoods with high collective efficacy show significantly lower crime rates, even after you account for poverty. Social cohesion itself plays an independent, highly measurable role in stopping crime. It's a real game changer.
Section 4. Pakistan's Urban Growth, Modern Application.
Let's see how this builds into a very real, very modern context. We can actually take this classic theory from 1920s Chicago and apply it directly to a country experiencing rapid, large-scale urbanization right now. If we look at the features of Chicago's early 1900s zone in transition and compare them to modern Kachia bodies, which are the informal, unregulated settlements on the outskirts of major Pakistani cities like Karachi, the parallels are staggering. Both feature concentrated poverty. Where Chicago saw high immigrant turnover, Karachi sees high rural migrant turnover as people arrive from the countryside seeking work. And in both places, this rapid demographic churn results in unstable local institutions and weak local infrastructure. And this perfectly illustrates the enduring power of the theory today. In Karachi, researchers discuss crime in exact social disorganization terms. The rapid internal migration and the highly transient nature of these neighborhoods link structural geography directly to persistently higher rates of street crime and gang activity in specific areas. The specific communities living in those areas have shifted substantially over the decades, just like they did in Chicago, but the weak local infrastructure remains, and so the high crime rate remains. The structure of the place drives the crime, not simply the character of the people living there.
Section 5. The Standard Critique, Theory Limitations.
Now, as with every framework we explore, we've got to maintain an impartial academic lens and fully understand its boundaries. So let's talk limitations. First off, the theory beautifully explains where crime concentrates, but it totally fails to explain why some specific individuals within a disorganized neighborhood turn to crime, while most of their neighbors living under the exact same conditions do not. Second, critics point out that in its earliest forms, the theory carried implicit assumptions that immigrant and minority communities were somehow inherently more prone to disorganization. It risked confusing the structural, damaging effects of poverty and systemic discrimination with the traits of the ethnic groups themselves. But even with those limitations, social disorganization theory is absolutely foundational because it opened the door for every sociological theory that followed. It forces us to ask that vital question: how does our social environment shape us? Next time, we will move to strain theory, where we shift from neighborhood structure to the gap between a society's goals and the legitimate means to achieve them. Until then, I want to leave you with a provocative question. Can you think of another neighborhood or another city anywhere in the world that perfectly fits this theory's pattern of structural disorganization? Think about it, and I'll see you in the next explainer.